Hey, what's up, tennis fans? You are watching new episode of The Tennis Inspector, and these days I'm in Irvine, California. But before we start, please make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel, as this gives me a lot of motivation to interview your favorite tennis players. Today I'm hosting a guest who's been junior #1 in the United States and competed on highest level in ATP. We covered a lot of interesting topics, including transitioning period from juniors to pro tour and mental side of tennis. Please welcome Michael McCLUNE.
You got to believe that you can be #1. Like if you don't believe it, it'll never happen. Focus on my mind much earlier in my career. I wouldn't have waited till I was 21.
And what do you think are the main qualities that a tennis player should possess in order to win Challenger?
You're used to battling every single day for 20 years. I mean, it started when I was really young, and now I don't have that anymore. I'd play a few futures a year. I didn't turn pro until I was 18. You're paying for all your expenses. You're paying for your coach's flight, your coach's, dinner, your coach's hotel, trainers, all that. But once Federer came around, I'd study Federer. I remember getting my first ATP point was one of the hardest things I've ever done on the tennis tour. You're not making any money until you're top 100. Tennis, I think, is just one of the toughest sports to make it in.
I served 2 aces and 2 winners. Yeah. So I thought that, whoa, that's a good start. And then I lost 6-1, 6-0.
yeah. It was like going on the court at the US Open when I was 18. You don't go into it realizing how tough it's going to be, both mentally and physically, until you actually do it. I ended up signing with IMG. I had sponsorships with Nike and Wilson.
Hi Michael, thank you so much for your time and being able to talk about tennis. Today I want to talk with you about your journey as a professional tennis player and given your background, your experience, your rankings in ATP, and maybe to get some recommendations to younger generation on how they should approach professional career. How did you get into tennis?
Yeah, I got in super young actually. My dad loved tennis growing up. He always played. He didn't play professional or anything, but he played starting super young, played through high school, and just was really passionate about tennis. And he got my mom into it when they met. And then I have an older sister, so they got her into it super young. And then when I came around, when I was like 3 years old, there was a racket laying around in the house, and I just picked it up and would never put it down. I started when I was like 3 years old, and would just do 30-minute lessons, once a week. And my parents just immediately saw the passion I had for it, and I'd sleep with my racket. I wouldn't put it down.
Who was your coach?
Jimmy Johnson. So when I was super young, I worked with various coaches, and throughout my years I was on and off again with the UST as well, with a number of coaches too, which really enjoyed. But from the age of I'd say 10, 11 to 17, it was Jimmy Johnson who runs the Advantage Tennis Academy right around here.
When you started playing tennis, when you were a kid, 10-year-old kid, what was your goals? To get to the top 100, top 10, being #1 in the world?
#1. It was something my dad had kind of instilled in me at a very young age, was you got to believe that you can be #1. If you don't believe it, it'll never happen. Yeah, and if you believe it, you have a shot. And I had a really good support team around me. My parents really supported me. My coaches supported me, and so I truly wanted to be #1. I believed it, and I think that's something that you need to kind of have that mindset.
Who were your idols growing up?
It was always Federer. When I was super young, Pete Sampras. Yeah. But once Federer came around, I'd study Federer. Hours a day. He was always the one I tried to model my game after.
I saw your backhand on some YouTube videos. It looks like Pete Sampras' backhand.
Yeah. It was between Sampras and Federer. I would just study tapes, and both those guys. I was fortunate enough to be able to practice with both those guys, which was awesome, being able to practice with your idol.
From the very beginning, when you started playing junior tournaments, you approached tennis as your profession, right?
Yeah, very early on, that was always the goal, was I'm going pro.
What age you started playing professional tour?
So I started playing futures when I was probably 15. I'd play a few futures a year. I didn't turn pro until I was 18. So once I turned 18 is kind of when I went full out, and I was playing a full calendar year. But I dabbled a little bit, 15, 16, 17, a few tournaments here and there, especially traveling with the USTA.
How hard it was playing future tournaments when you were 15, 16 years old?
Man, it was brutal. You go from winning a lot as a junior.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, there's so much depth to tennis. And all of a sudden, like, you're just losing constantly. And I remember getting my first ATP point was one of the hardest things I've ever done on the tennis tour. It took me, I forget how many tournaments it took me, but it took a lot of tournaments just to get that first point.
What was the toughest moment when you turned pros?
I think the traveling was pretty tough. I wasn't used to traveling. You know, when I was growing up, I didn't really play the ITF, so I wasn't traveling like a lot of the kids were from a very young age there. I mean, a lot of the kids that I grew up with were traveling 15, 20 weeks a year at you know, 14, 15 years old. I didn't start that until I turned pro at 18. It was kind of like a, holy smokes, you're living out of a suitcase for more than half the year.
Yeah.
I wasn't really used to that. So I'd say that's definitely one of the pieces. Other pieces, just again, going back to the competition, it's completely different. It's a different level. And you have to, not only on the tennis side, but then also on the physical side and getting your body, like I didn't develop till pretty late. I mean, when I got on tour, I was a stick, you know what I mean? So like cardio wise and strength wise was something that I had to immediately work on heavily.
What about mentality? I think it's a completely different world, yeah?
So that's actually really good that you brought that up. That is actually the number one thing that I struggled with. If I were to actually rank it, was my mind. I was very weak mentally my entire career up until about halfway through my professional career when I started working with a sports psychologist, and it completely changed it. I wish if I could go back and change one thing, it would have been focusing on my mind right away.
Yeah. But that's very interesting to hear that you were weak mentally because you were number one in juniors.
Yeah, number one in juniors, but again, once you go to pros, it's completely different.
Yeah.
And even number one in juniors, you know, when you think back on it, I was winning a lot, but I would still get extremely nervous before matches. During matches, my mind would be scattered. You know, looking back on it, you're like, okay, if I had been even more solid mentally then, who knows how much better I would have been.
How did you solve this problem?
So I started working with a sports psychologist when I was 21, I think, 2021. And I would do, you know, an hour or two a week with her name's Alexis Castori, really well known, works with some of the top, you know, people in the world. Yeah. And just through her kind of methodology, it completely changed how I approached everything on the court, and even when I was off the court too. And it was a complete night and day shift of how strong I was mentally. And you know, that got to a certain point in my career where like I wasn't really improving anymore tennis wise, and I kind of knew that, but I was still able to get a little bit higher, a little bit further, simply because of my mind.
Do you miss playing tennis?
I do. You know, when I first stopped, I was completely burned out. Yeah. And I went into coaching for a little bit, but I knew I wasn't going to end up coaching for a very long time, and did it for like 6 months and kind of just stopped. And really for the first like 3 years of retirement, didn't miss it that much. And then it kind of got to the point where I was like, okay, I do miss traveling. I do miss the competition. I think it's the competition really that you're used to battling every single day for 20 years. I mean, it started when I was really young, and now I don't have that anymore. And now it's kind of gotten to the point actually just recently where I'm like, I kind of want to get back into it, start playing again. I really don't play at all.
What do you do now?
So I'm in software sales now. So I work for a company called Alteryx. So right when I quit tennis, I immediately went into business with my sister. She had a software company that she had started, and so I worked there for a couple years, just trying to get used to like the corporate life. Ended up branching out and going to another software company where I did sales for about 4 years. And now I'm at this new company. So I've been in the tech industry for about 6 years now.
Do you enjoy this?
I do. Yeah. It's when I quit, I was trying to think of what can I do to get as close to that competition as possible. And in my mind, that's sales, because it's very similar in the sense of it's a roller coaster. You have some really good months where you're selling a lot. You have some really bad months where you're not. And it's up and down, and you kind of get that euphoric feeling that you get when you win a match, when you close a deal. And so that's kind of why I went that route.
That's why you chose this path. You've been number 267 in ATP. That's your best result. And well, first of all, how hard it was to get there?
It was very hard. So I got there kind of in two separate different eras in my career. So early on, not early on, but within the first probably 3 years of going on tour, I got to like 280, and then that's when I got injured. I hurt my hip, so I was out for about, I think, 6 months of tournaments and pretty much lost, most of my ranking. And then I had to work my way back up from virtually nothing, and that's when I got back up to 267. And it was just, I mean, it's brutal. You're playing again 30-35 weeks a year, and at that ranking, you're not making a lot of money, if anything.
Yeah.
And you're not playing in like the nicest venues or areas. You're doing anything possible to get these points to work your way up. So it was extremely challenging. It was extremely challenging because I would do really well in futures, right? I won multiple futures. I'd always do, for the most part, I'd go deep in futures, and then trying to get to that next level of challengers. I'd, for the most part, struggle a lot of times in challengers. Later in my career, I started doing a little bit better in challengers, but just each level that you go up, it's just crazy how much the level of tennis goes up.
And what do you think are the main qualities that a tennis player should possess in order to win challenger?
I would say, one, you gotta love it. If you don't love being out there, because it's your life. I mean, you're dedicating so many hours a day to it. You have to absolutely love it. I'd say, two, you definitely have to have some type of talent, but I would say two would probably be work ethic. You have to be willing to work harder than anyone else out there, both on the court and off the court, whether that's in the gym or whether that's taking care of your body or whether that's, again, mental fitness. And then three, I would say you got to be ready for a roller coaster. You got to persevere, because it's every week you're just going, it's high and low, right? One week you are on top of the world because you just won a tournament or you got far in a tournament. And then the next week, literally 2 days later, the next tournament starts and you might lose first round. Yeah. And you got to just be able to weather the storm.
If we give a percentage breakdown, how much talent?
Like what percent talent-wise would you need? Ooh, that's a tough one. I would go on the lower end. I would say, I don't know what exact percentage, but I would definitely go on the lower end, and I would say work ethic. I would say work ethic and mental are heavier weighted.
Okay.
I don't know if that's 40-40-20. But I would definitely put talent or athleticism on the lower end of the scale.
Based on the ATP website, you earned $140,000 in prize money. So my question is, like, you showed a very good results, like being 250 in the world. That's a very good result. You still competed on major tournaments. You've been in the qualifiers and the main draws of Grand Slams.
Yep.
How many tournaments you need to win? How many matches you need to win in order to earn enough money to afford yourself a professional team around you?
You have to be in the top 100 to be able to do that.
Top 100, yeah.
Yeah,
that's a minimum.
Top 100's a minimum to be able to travel with any type of support team. Yeah. Coach and trainer. I think it's absolutely top 100. I think if you're 120, 150, 170, you can maybe travel with the coach. I doubt you're going to be able to do both a coach and a trainer, but I mean, if you start thinking about the prize money, it's not a lot. I mean, I got to 250, and you saw, I mean, I was on the tour for 6 years, and it was a total of 120 or 140, whatever it was. And it's not like you have, it's not like you're on a team sport where they're paying for your expenses. You're paying for all your expenses. You're paying for your coach's flight, your coach's, dinner, your coach's hotel, trainers, all that. And it's extremely, extremely tough to make a living off of it. You need, for the most part, some type of financial support, whether that's through sponsorships or through a family. It's extremely tough to make a living.
Do you think that in order to promote tennis, there should be some changes regarding the prize money?
Yeah, I think so, and I don't know what those changes need to be. I have no idea. I haven't followed it enough, but it's, I mean, you have such a fraction of the guys being able to make any type of living off of it. Yeah.
But still, it's like dedicating
their entire life to tennis, and again, I have no idea how a lot of them are able to stay out there for 8 years, playing futures and challengers. They must have some type of financial support, but you're not making any money until you're top 100. Until you're in the slams, you're just really not making anything.
Among your peers, like let's say like top 20 junior tennis players, how many of them broke through like top 100?
So in my kind of like age group, we had, I would say, only a handful. So Sam Query was around my age group. He was a couple years older. Steve Johnson was in my kind of age group.
Kudla?
Kudla, another one. Donald Young. Did I say Donald Young?
No.
Donald Young. I would say probably between 5 and 10 around my age group broke through.
What happened with others?
It's one of those things where some guys were super early on as a young junior are leaps and bounds better than other people, and you think, okay, for sure they're going to make it, right? And then you had some guys where they weren't. They were maybe, you know, the 10th best in the group that was, you know, always traveling together as a young player, and maybe they went off to college, and you thought, okay, they're done. They're not probably going to go pro, and they come out of college and they crush it. You know what I mean? I don't know what really changes, but I think that's what's really tough is to be able to tell at a very young age, at 12, 14. I mean, unless you have like a prodigy, I think it's very tough to tell who's actually going to make it.
What do you think are the main reasons why players of such level in junior tour give up playing tennis in professional tour?
I guess I can give it from my perspective. At a certain point, I always told myself I was never going to stop until I stopped improving and truly felt I was not going to, quote unquote, make it. Until that day came, I was going to stay out there for as long as I could. I mean, obviously financially, I needed to be able to do that. But as long as I could keep doing it financially, if I felt like I was continuing to improve, I wasn't going to stop. A day finally came where I felt it, and I just knew it happened, that I was not improving anymore, tennis-wise. And I wasn't going to get it much higher than where I was. And that's kind of when I said, okay, this is going to be my final year. I don't know if that's similar to other guys as well, but I guess that's just my feedback of kind of how I approached when am I going to end this.
What would be your recommendation to parents who has kids that start their professional career, like in terms on how they should approach it, how they should, you know, guide their kids?
At a young age, or once they've already started the professional, at a young age?
Closer to 16, let's say 17 years old, when they transition to the professional tour.
When they transition, I would say you gotta one, support them and know that they're about to go through one of the toughest things you can possibly go through as a professional athlete. So you've definitely got to support them and constantly, I think, just continue to give positive feedback, but you also need to help them build a team around them that's gonna get them to the next level. Whether that's a really good tennis coach, whether that's a really good trainer, whether that's a mental trainer, you know, sports psychologist. You really need to look at it from all angles. It's not just about the time on the court.
You certainly had some expectations when you started playing professional tour, but once you faced this, you know, everyday's journeys to different tournaments, mental side of tennis, stronger fitness, what was the reality compared to expectations?
It was night and day. You don't go into it realizing how tough it's going to be, both mentally and physically, until you actually do it, and then you realize, like, this is one of the toughest things you're ever going to try career-wise. Ever. I mean, yes, they were. So I was on tour for 6 years, and you know, looking back on it, I'm always like, gosh, those really were some of the best 6 years of my life. I really, really did enjoy it. But while you're in the moment, there's multiple times where you're so down. You're like, why am I doing this? This is so much tougher than I ever thought it could possibly be.
I remember my first future event when I played in Spain, and I served 2 aces and 2 winners. So I thought that, whoa, that's a good start, and then I lost 6-1, 6-0.
Yes. So there's been multiple times where I went out there and got absolutely chopped, and I was like, oh my gosh.
Most memorable match?
When I won my first ATP main draw match. It was at Winston-Salem right before the US Open. I had qualified, so I'd won, I think it was 3 rounds in qualifying. Played Alejandro Falla, and ended up winning that match, and that was my first ATP win ever. And then had an opportunity to play Jürgen Melzer. In the second round. So I would say those 2 matches were actually one of my most memorable in terms of how I did. But by far the most memorable was when I actually got into the US Open main draw. So I had won 18 nationals here in the States, which
you
is
got
called
a wild card,
Kalamazoo, and I got a wild card in the US Open. And I played Juan Ingnacio Chela on
Yeah.
court. I think it was court 7, so it had stadium on one side, and it was electric, magical.
Yeah.
I will never forget that moment. It feels like it was yesterday. I was young. I was 18. I was so nervous, but I had the crowd on my side. I had my entire family out there. I had my coaches out there. I had friends out there, and it was hands down my most favorite match I've ever played.
So you mentioned Juan Ignacio Chela. You also played against such players as Nishikori, right?
Yeah.
You remember these matches? Yeah.
I do, yeah. I trained with Kay quite a few times as well down in Bradenton at the Bollettieri Tennis Academy.
What do you think differentiates such players as Nishikori, Juan Ignacio Chela from all other players?
So someone like Kay, since very, very early on, he could strike the ball so well, so clean, and so powerful, while still being so consistent. It was insane from a very, very young age. On top of it, his footwork is insane.
Yeah.
Extremely fast, doesn't get tired. And no matter where you put him on the court, he's going to hit a clean, hard ball back and get back into position. So I think it's a combination kind of all of that, of being able to strike an extremely clean ball consistently while having the footwork and the stamina to continue to do it day in and day out.
Do you think that this is something that you can teach, or?
I think it's stuff you can teach. You know what I mean? I don't like taking their approach of, oh, you're just born with it.
Yeah.
Because then it's like, okay, why? Kind of defeats the purpose of trying. Because it's like, I believe it's something that you can teach, and the student has to be willing to put in the time and the effort and the work hours into it to get there. But I do think, regardless of whether you're born with God-given talent, you can get there.
Basically, you are saying that it is very important to find the right coach at the very beginning, to...
Very, very important to find the right coach, get the right fundamentals. My dad was super focused from a very young age on form, on forehand and backhand form, volley form, serve form, and I think that served me very well, because you get into these habits at a very young age on how important little things are in tennis. I mean, it's a game of inches, right? And everyone has different strokes. They look differently, but at a certain point, right, it's very similar if you break it down.
Yeah.
And I think it's very, very important you have a very good coach that knows what he's doing, knows how to train you at a very young age.
Why did you decide to stop playing tennis, and what was the reason for this?
It was all centered around when I knew mentally, when I knew in my mind that I was not going to quote unquote break through.
Okay.
It was all around that. I had always believed I was going to get to that next step. Okay, I'm at 260 now. I'm going to get to top 200. I'm going to get to top 100. And once the day came where I was just like, look, I'm not improving anymore. This isn't going to. I'm not going to go anywhere. I could stay out here and I could maybe get a little bit closer to top 200, but I'm not going to get much farther along than that. Definitely not going to break a top 100 right now, where I can actually make a living. I've tried it for 6 years. I gave it a very long run. I need to bow down. I need to bow out now.
Yeah.
Now's the time to get out of this and get into
and
corporate life.
What would you do differently, looking back?
I would do 2 things differently. I would, one, focus on my mind much earlier in my career. I wouldn't have waited till I was 21 to start that. Because there were so many matches where I simply lost because of my mental toughness when I was 18, 19, 20. And who knows where I would have gone if I had won those matches. 2, taking care of my body. So I put in a ton of hours. I had a really good work ethic. I put in a ton of hours on the court, ton of hours in the gym. But when it came time, when I was 18, 19, 20, to start stretching for 30 minutes and getting massages and doing foam rolling, I hated that stuff. And I just didn't. Sometimes my coach would tell me to do it, and I'm out of here. No, and it caught up to me. When I was 21, I had a really bad injury, and I cannot stress enough how important it is to take care of your body very early on. Putting in the time to be stretching a lot. I mean, once I came back from my injury, I was putting in an hour alone, hour to hour and a half alone, just on stretching, foam rolling each day, every single day.
That's a really good point, because there are a lot of junior tennis players who just skip this. Even top junior tennis players, they skip this moment. They do not stretch.
Well, it's like growing up, I never had injuries ever. I mean, I'd practice 4 hours a day, 6 days a week. I'd play every local tournament there was, and I'd never had an injury. And so you start to get to 17, 18, 19, 20 years old, and you think it's going to continue that way.
Yeah.
But it's not. One, your body's obviously going to start breaking down just from wear and tear, and two, the level of tennis is way higher.
Yeah.
And so if you don't realize that early on, you're going to end up getting injured.
I know that you didn't go to college because you decided to pursue your professional career in tennis. What was the decision-making process?
Yeah. So I was, from a very young age, I always wanted to go straight pro. I never really even thought about going to college, never really even considered that as an option because I was so focused on going professional. Once I was about 17, I started thinking, okay, maybe I should start looking at colleges. I started looking at SC, Stanford, UCLA. I had kind of narrowed down, if I did go to college, it was going to be UCLA. And I ended up winning, again, the Kalamazoo when I was 18. And from there, the sponsorships that I got, I ended up signing with IMG. I had sponsorships with Nike and Wilson, and they were just really, it was just a great opportunity that I didn't want to pass up.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I felt like I was ready personally to go pro. And thinking back on it, right, I don't think there is a right answer or not, whether you go pro straight out of high school or if you go to college. For me personally, though, in that situation, I think I made the right choice. If I were to do it again, I'd make the same choice. But I think it's different for everyone, depending on financial situation, depending on how they are mentally, physically.
Does all of these sacrifices worth in order to get to top?
Was it worth it?
300. Yeah.
Yeah, I would do it again.
Yeah.
I think it set me up for. I think it sets you up for in life for whatever you want to do afterwards.
Yeah.
Because, and this is just personal opinion, tennis I think is just one of the toughest sports to make it in. It's a solo sport. You're out there by yourself. You're traveling a lot of times by yourself. And so you end up becoming very strong mentally in terms of perseverance and work ethic, and that translates to everything in my mind. It's translated for me in my corporate life now. And also, the aspect of constantly being under pressure and performing and competition also translates to corporate life.
Develop your character.
It develops your character,
your personality. Yeah.
You go into, for me, it's when I go into like a big meeting now, I know what those feelings are going to be like, because it was like going on the court at the U.S. Open when I was 18. Right?
Yeah,
you're extremely nervous, but you learn how to manage it and get through it and still perform. So I wouldn't have changed anything, and I still say it to this day that those 6 years, looking back on it, were some of the best years of my life. I got to see a lot of places. I got to travel to a ton of countries, and just have a lot of experiences.
What would be your recommendation to parents and younger generation in order how they should deal with losses?
So I think you need to, I think losing's great, especially early on, because it's a chance to learn from it. My dad and my coach would videotape matches all the time, especially even when I was on tour, early on tour, every match would get videotaped. And then we'd sit afterwards and we'd go through it and you'd study it. So I think that kind of is extremely important. And around losses, I mean, again, it goes back to the support team, keep positive reassurance to them, especially when they're losing. But don't get super down, like especially when you're young, 10, 12, 14. Don't worry so much about winning as it is about developing your game.
It's sometimes difficult.
Like for me, I think I was 12, I went from a two-handed backhand to a one-handed backhand.
Oh, okay.
And I was number one in the 10s and the 12s for all the years, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old. And then all of a sudden I was like, okay, I'm going to switch to one-handed backhand. And it was something, right, like I talked to with my dad. My dad wanted me to switch to develop my game, my coaches. And I took a year off playing tournaments. I just simply worked on developing my game. Now, I don't necessarily recommend taking like a year off tournaments, but when I came back, I was losing all the time. And this is again going back to my support system, because you're too young to know this, them constantly reassuring you that, don't focus so much on the winning and losing right now. Focus on where you're trying to get to, where you want to be in 6 years from now. And how are you going to get there? And that's developing your game at a young age.
What does tennis mean to you?
For a while it meant life to me. It was my life.
Yeah.
I think for now, right now, it means my character, as you put it.
Yeah.
It developed me as a person.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I wouldn't give anything away for it. I personally would do it all again. It's the toughest thing I'll probably ever go through in a job wise, but I loved where it got me to as a person and mentally.
Thank you, Michael. That was very educational.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.